So, as we introduce the topic of bad dreams, I wanted to tell a little bit of my story in relationship to this in particular, because my relationship as a dreamer is forged in the crucible of nightmares and sleep paralysis and in bad dreams of all stripes, really. In fact, the first recorded dream that I wrote down when I was 14 years old was a nightmare. And it was a nightmare that turned into a sleep paralysis encounter. And so it was like it was a double duty that first time. And so that's my first recorded dream. And and adolescence was full of all kinds of dreams, including lucid dreams, but the nightmare theme kept coming back for me and was disruptive to my life and to, I would say, my self-esteem, the way that I see the world. And I needed support for it, which I found in the tumult of in the late 80s and early 90s. There was less support for this kind of thing, but I find myself to be really blessed by having a youth minister who understood about how important consciousness is to adolescents and creating safe spaces to talk about these things, and as well as like support with my family. And then what happened to me is that, I got into young adulthood and I had my first career as an archaeologist. And when I was getting grounded in that work, the nightmares started stirring up again in a way that was unexpected. And the old defenses or methods of working with them were no longer working. And I knew that I needed a new level of support, or I was driven really to figure out, like, what is this about? Because for me, the nightmares came with lucidity often. And this is something that we'll see as we move through this focus, is how tangential actually lucidity is with that high emotionality and negative emotionality. It's not by accident that lucidity emerges out of terror sometimes, or even disgust, or other strong emotions that captivate us and then stick with us when we wake up, right? And so this is how and why I went to California and got training as a dream worker and worked with a number in different modalities, one-on-one, as well as group work for a number of years. And that community work is really what I think I could say is, it set me right. I consider that as like a new chapter in my life, having the tools to work with my dreams and the difficulties and the benefits that they bring up, and they come together, right? New levels of emergence into higher states of consciousness come with deeper levels of shadow and deeper, more complex layering. And so that's what's so interesting about, I think, dream work in general, but looking at the bad dreams as a focus, is that the work's never done, and that we tend to cycle through these patterns of content that are our own. Like it's a very personal thing. And so while we can talk about archetypal levels, and we will, it's also so peculiar to the individual. And we really see that this in particular with nightmares when we look at repetitive dreams. And in general, I think that repetitive dreams are easier to work with. And in fact, this is what Carl Jung would say, the psychologist would say, is that it's not really about a single dream. It's find the dream series, follow the dream series. How does something change over time? And so what makes this so practical, of course, is when we journal our dreams And when we work with our dreams, we begin to see these larger patterns that are beyond just this moment and this particular symbol, but how does this emerge over the landscape of my life as I take on new roles, new responsibilities, new self-identities, um, a new body, a new landscape as we move through life. So the big picture of bad dreams is to focus on the different kinds of bad dreams that there are. So classic nightmares, as well as parasomnias, including sleep paralysis, including sleep terrors, as well as existential dreams, which are kind of the forgotten stepsister of nightmares. They really have their own medicine to them. And then also lucid nightmares. And so how formal lucidity in the dream and the nightmare complex come together, and what does that look like? So each of our 4 sessions, though, is not going to be focused necessarily on just one type of nightmare, but I'm going to focus it on, each one has its own tonic or balm, you could say. And so we'll be focusing on different tonics, dream medicines for each of these sessions. And hopefully that'll take us through the process. And so when you come out of this, you'll have some new tools, some new tonics, some new balms to work with these dreams in ways that that will be beneficial. I think not only individually, but for us collectively, and as a group, as we project and dream together here in the portal, right? So with that, I'd like to open us up into our space with a poem. And I have another poem I've read from this poet before, Denis Levertov. This is sort of this prodigy poet from the 1970s. This particular chapbook. And this poem is called Jacob's Ladder. The stairway is not a thing of gleaming strands, a radiant evanescence for angels' feet that only glance in their tread and need not touch the stone. It is of stone, a rosy stone that takes a glowing tone of softness only because behind it the sky is a doubtful, a doubting night gray. A stairway of sharp angles solidly built. One sees that the angels must spring down from one step to the next, giving a little lift of the wings. And a man climbing must scrape his knees and bring the grip of his hands into play. The cut stone consoles his groping feet. Wings brush past him. The poem ascends. What I love about that poem is the magical realism that it brings to a topic that is so ethereal and light, and she brings it into solidity of what does it feel like to be a human, and to ascend into other realms, and we still do our human ways, and yet we have a chance to be brushed by an angel's wing or something of that nature. And that's what I feel like nightmares and bad dreams do for us, is these moments of awe that level us and yet also put us in touch with something otherworldly. I'd like to start with a dream tonight, one of my own repetitive nightmares. And so for the last 15 years, I've had a repetitive dream after becoming a parent of the theme of the forgotten child or the forgotten baby. And it often is gruesome and terrifying. Sometimes in imagery, always in emotion. And the theme, for example, would be walking down a hallway where there's multiple doors on each side of the hallway and a sense of ominousness, darkness, and fear. And I open a door to the room and I enter it, and there is a baby cradle. And sometimes there's a sheet over a mysterious shape in the cradle. And sometimes that's enough to make me wake up right then and there. That's as far as I get. Sometimes I get farther and I see spots of red blood on the sheets. And that's as far as I get. One time, I had this dream, and I am looking over the cradle, and there's the sheet, and there is the shape, about the shape of an infant. And something amazing happened. Somehow I became curious rather than fearful. And I thought to myself, well, let's just find out what's really under here. And so I pulled the sheet off, and at first glimpse, it did appear to be a dead infant. It was not moving. It looked cold and clammy and gray. The skin was gray. And I kept looking, though, and I kept looking at it, almost just couldn't keep my eyes off of it. And at that point, I realized that its little fingers moved and it twitched. And I touched it. And the child came to life. The child woke up. This is a theme that has been wrought over how many repetitions, how many times. But that one particular time was the dream that made it through. And I haven't had that dream since. Not that particular nightmare. It dissolved into new forms. But here we go, right? Here we go. This is the work. So I wanted to open with that dream because it shows again the terror, the beauty, and the hope that I think that these experiences can bring for us when we make the decision to focus on them, to acknowledge them. I want to talk a little bit about definitions. There is a problem with nightmares. There's a problem with nightmares and bad dreams in the clinical, in the research community. The definitions are all over the map, but we can call a nightmare a dream with heavy or dysphoric emotion that causes distress in the dream. And after awakening, the feelings can linger and cause further distress. the point of the bad dream and the nightmare as a whole is that they're impactful and that they linger. And so it's not about the content of the dream per se, because there's plenty of folks who have, say, very violent dreams and very intense dreams, and then they wake up and it's not distressful. We see this a lot with video game players who play a lot of violent video games. They can have where they're in a war in their dream and they wake up and they're like, I'm fine. And so it's tracking the content. We have to be careful and look at like what makes this a bad dream, what makes this even a nightmare is that it's impactful, the feelings linger, we feel less than afterwards. We feel diminished in some capacity. And then of course it can cycle. And so the waking life diminishment causes further, movement in the dream world that can even take us further down that path. Now, there's two major branches of formal nightmares. And the first one is the post-traumatic stress disorder nightmare, the PTSD dream. And we're not going to spend much time talking about that in this course. Number one is that we can't quite work with them with this level of container that I feel comfortable with. But to know that PTSD dreams is a topic that has exploded in the last decade, and that the research is quite profound, showing that many, many, many more people are suffering from trauma and from traumatizing experiences than folks really realized. And so at first, PTSD came out of war theater, came out of the Vietnam War era, but since it's emerged into all kinds of traumatic events that can cause lingering effects, including repetitive chronic nightmares. And the PTSD dream, the main thing that differentiates it as a phenomenon is that it is often quite parallel to a traumatic event in waking life. Not 100% a replay, but very close a replay. And if you look at the PTSD dreams in series, there's always variations, but it does seem to be highly focused on something that occurred in waking life and that is still being processed. And when folks are not supported with these dreams, the nightmares seem to, continue to re-traumatize and re-trigger folks' experiences. So PTSD dreams are very intense, and there are treatments that are effective for some people some of the time, but it's difficult. It's really difficult. And so what I'm lightened by is knowing that a lot of PTSD trauma counselors and therapists are teaching their methods to the lay public now, because what we're discovering is that some of the tactics for helping folks like that, they can do themselves. And so it's better to have, a professional, but knowing that so few people are getting help and that the help, when they do get it, is effective only some of the time, right? The window really narrows. Folks are sharing, and I want to share a book that I would recommend on this topic. If you want to look into PTSD dreams, it's Linda Yale Scheller's book. It's wonderful, very practical. PTSD dreams is one aspect of dreaming, and it's considered chronic, and it's considered almost like a broken dream, as if the trauma has broken the normal functioning system of what a dream is supposed to do. And so I wanted to share this piece first, and to know that we're not mostly going to be discussing that in this course, but of course it will come up. But that's not the main focus. Really, when we talk about nightmares, we'll be talking about what's called idiopathic nightmares, which is the quote unquote normal functioning nightmare. Idiopathic means unknown cause, which is interesting. I think the definition of idiopathic nightmare basically means this is a mystery. These things happen, they're natural, and it's not caused by, say, chronic alcohol use, or it's not caused by drug addiction, or it's not caused by some other health condition that is bringing up the nightmares. It seems to be on its own accord. And so these are normal nightmares, and everyone experiences them from time to time, right? They're not the broken dream. They don't necessarily need to be fixed. And that's a really important point. Is there is an assumption in humanistic psychology, there's an assumption, a Western assumption, that a nightmare needs to be changed and transformed and fixed in order for us to function with it or to get something from it. And why I think that this is a bias that comes out of the clinical perspective that's very healthy and helpful for the normal individual who has the nightmare every so often. It's not helpful because actually facing our nightmares that come every so often is the way forward. A nightmare doesn't necessarily need to be fixed. It's a dream that's hollering. It's a dream that's yelling. It's a dream that is asking for attention. So rather than crushing it, or the only good nightmare is a dead nightmare, sometimes it's good to look at the dream and to acknowledge it and see where its dark gifts lie. So that said, with the idiopathic nightmare, there's a problem, and I mentioned that there's sort of this line between bad dreams and nightmares that's debated. In just case in point, it has to do right now with the debate around the awakening criteria. So some psychologists are saying, well, does a nightmare really need to wake you up to be classified as a nightmare? That is the classical definition that's been used in the modern sense of what a nightmare is. A bad dream of dysphoric emotion that causes distress that the dreamer awakens from. But dreams that don't wake us up can sometimes be just as maladaptive. They can be just as impactful. And so people are saying, well, maybe we should throw it out, and maybe we shouldn't. And right now, here's where it stands in the DSM-6. The awakening criteria is not used for a nightmare. It may lead to awakening by definition, according to the DSM-6. But for the WHO, the World Health Organization, the awakening criteria is still used. For the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, they're kind of wiffle-waffling. They're hedging their bet. They're like, maybe there's an awakening criteria, maybe not. It's interesting because nobody really knows what we're talking about. So when people talk about nightmares in research, we have to be like, well, what is your definition here, and what are we talking about? So I wonder if, for the purposes of this class, that I think it might be more helpful to really kind of sink back into bad dreams in general in a more relaxed definition, not use the awakening criteria, to heap them together, knowing that we're, from our perspective as dream workers, as a perspective as individuals who are trying to work with our own dreams and sit with people who are discovering their dreams, that the impact is the most important thing to focus on. So that said, what we can agree on is that the classic idiopathic nightmare is a REM phenomena. It occurs generally in the second half of the night. So I once framed sleep using the integrative work of Fariba Bagzaran and Danielle Deloria, talking about the first half of the night being restorative sleep and the second half of the night being integrative sleep. And so the nightmare emerges out of integrative sleep, the second half of the night, where there's longer REM sessions that are mixed with light sleep, and it kind of just, and awakenings. And so they tether back and forth. That is where the REM nightmare is most likely to occur. They're narrative, they have strong emotions, and they tend to have the euphemism dream bizarreness, which we'll move into a little bit more about what that means. And so they tend to be dreams that have strong emotion and that are long and end with folks having disrupted feelings, tend to also have visual imagery that's quite extraordinary or quote unquote bizarre. And so there's something special, I think, going on in that relationship, that visual emotional kinesthesia. So I want to open it up and see what y'all think about what would you guess are the most common nightmare themes? What is the most common nightmare themes in the world? And you can use the chat for this if you'd like, or unmute yourself, but throw some themes at me.
So just off the top of my head, I read a lot about people that are chased or being chased by some entity that they believe is going to cause harm. I think chasing dreams are very common.
Chased, yeah, good.
About teeth falling out?
Nice. That's one of my classics.
About demons or Luther or witchcraft?
Demons, witchcraft. What was the second word you said?
Luther, which is, the devil.
Got it. Thank you.
Being overwhelmed, can't keep up, forgot about school or forgot about a responsibility.
Good one. Good one.
A plane crash. Either a plane crashing on me or being in a plane that is about to crash.
Excellent.
Tidal wave.
All right. So maybe natural disasters.
Mm-hmm.
Driving down crazy roads just really fast, out of control in cars or a vehicle.
I had that one a few nights ago myself.
Scary animals.
Ooh, good one. Good one.
About falling dreams.
Yeah.
Claustrophobia, being caught in a tight space.
Ooh. That's a different kind of, it's a different kind of experience, isn't that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking at our list. That's a lot. I mean, right? That's kind of a lot. That's a lot of humanity right there. From teeth falling out to demons to feeling overwhelmed and claustrophobic to plane crashes and tidal waves. Scary animals. So maybe an attack theme. Great. So these, every single one of these that you have mentioned is in the top themes except the demons theme, interestingly. So I'm looking at the references here that Michael Schradel has done recently, who is German psychologist, done a lot of nightmare research, both clinical as well as literature reviews. And this is what his most recent review and study showed, is that the top common themes of nightmares include failure and helplessness, themes of physical aggression, accidents, being chased, health-related concerns, and death. That's interesting because we didn't mention that one specifically. I mean, like, there's a threat of death if you're falling out of the sky in an airplane, but not just the I'm going to die feeling. Followed by interpersonal conflicts, and then apprehension or worry. And one of the things that the study corrected for, or is suggesting there could be a correction for in the DSM, is that they also saw some consistent themes with the fear of others dying. So not just the fear of myself dying, but the fear of, say, a loved one dying. And that was a persistent theme as well. So we know this territory really well. And what's interesting about this territory is that you look cross-culturally, and there might be some like slight derivations of the top scariest dream, but they're all more or less in this complex here of the way that misfortune, you could say, is applied to human life. There's some demographic differences too. I mean, like, children have more animal dreams in general, and so they also have more animal attacking dreams, and they also have more chasing dreams. And adults have more dreams of exams. Oh, I'm sorry. Adolescents have more dreams of exams, like failing the test. And adults have more dreams of failure, fear of failure, or sort of like that, almost like deadly embarrassing failure. So a social worries. And so there's differences in nightmares throughout the lifespan, but there's also a bunch of other layers into it as well. And one of them is socioeconomic forces plays a huge role. And so folks who have less access to education, who are in the bottom half of the economic ladder, who have less control of their sleep because they're working several jobs, they have more nightmares. Folks who self-identify that their health is poor, that their health is even just fair to poor, report more nightmares. And the age of nightmares peaks at 40 to 50 years old. Now, that was a surprise for me. And I don't really have a ready answer for why that is. But this is what the demographic data shows us, is that the idiopathic nightmare frequency is more persistent for middle-aged folks, especially because of socioeconomic factors. Now, the other big link that's been discovered about what induces nightmares is, and this is also no surprise, but it's stress, it's anxiety. And so this includes physical stress as well as emotional stress. So if you aren't getting enough physical rest, the body can have, these experiences can emerge. There's one more correlation that I want to discuss before we move on from this sort of wide perspective of it, which is that frequent and distressing nightmares is also correlated with depression as well as suicidal ideation. And that last one is what really gets the clinicians attention and why nightmares are really being looked at all now is because of this. Folks who have more nightmares seem to be at an increased suicide risk. And what happens when folks really suffer from nightmares, and so by really suffering more than one nightmare a week in general, although the definition can go as low as one distressing nightmare a month, but that's the minimum. It's classified as a nightmare disorder. And so this is basically this is where with our insurance systems that we are more likely to be able to get access to medication and to therapies, and where folks go through different kinds of treatments for their nightmares to lessen their burden. And interestingly, one other note about nightmare sufferers, and not necessarily those who suffer the most, but kind of across the board, is that there is this angle about what Ernest Hartman called thin boundaries. Folks who are more unguarded psychologically, or undefended, or vulnerable. Often also more creative, more artistic, more open to unseen possibilities, more willing to take risks. So people with these attributes who have quote unquote thin boundaries are not able to cope as well with the frightening visions that might come through the night. And maybe they lack their barriers of identity in that for other folks, they're just not affected. Thin boundaries folks are affected. They are more sensitive. And this is something that's gone back in psychology actually over 100 years. In fact, William James had a term that was very similar to this idea. He called it folks who had a temperament that was tender-mindedness. I really love that phrase, tender-minded. I think we might have to bring that phrase back when it comes. And the way that I see this is the double-edged sword for folks who experience nightmares, is that nightmare sufferers generally are creative, artistic, out-of-the-box thinkers who are more affected by the world. And so there's more pain, but there's also more beauty, there's more possibility, there's more potentiality here. And so this is the edge, right? This is the edge that thin boundary people walk. Why do we have nightmares is a trickier question. And this is where often folks kind of veer into interpretation. But one thing we should say is that when you look at the content of nightmares, it really supports the continuity hypothesis, which is the idea that we dream about the thoughts and the concerns that we have in waking life. So, and it's the continuity hypothesis is not just about objects, but it's about relationships, and it's about patterns of thinking as well. And so patterns of metacognition, patterns of thinking, patterns of emotionality, as well as things like if you have cats in your house, you're going to be more likely to dream of cats, right? And so this is one of the central things that's come out of the quantitative study of dreams for the last 25 years. And it's so rock solid with data that it's basically impossible to debate. But, right, it begs the question about, well, what about the bizarreness? What about the monsters? What about the zombies? What about the undead? What about the tidal waves? And this is where I think Bad Dreams really gets interesting. because bad dreams are not just about what has happened to us, but it's about the way that we see the world and our place in it. So we're dreaming the way forward. Dreams are past, present, and future possibilities as existential moments. And this is true for nightmares as well. And so one of the assumptions that often a person has that when they have a bad dream is that, oh, I've just uncovered something that traumatic that happened to me in childhood, but I can't remember that. And most of the time, that's actually not the case. There's something else that's emergent, something else that's going on. One of the interesting theories about nightmares comes out of the evolutionary theory of nightmares, that we dream to rehearse a threat to either our person or to the community. And so nightmares are not just about trauma that's happened, but about potential traumas on the horizon. This is super interesting to me because that collective piece emerges where we say, is this my dream or is this our dream? What's happening? But there's no getting around it when it comes to monsters, when it comes to zombies. Dreams are symbolic, nightmares are symbolic. We're dreaming the way forward, and we're doing it with patterns of thought, patterns of visual, emotional, kinesthetic metaphors, right? Archetypal images. Sometimes they're body feelings that are mapped onto objects. One of my favorites is this metaphor of, for instance, of the dream that someone will have when they're close to death or going through a dying process. So you see this dream in hospice a lot. And it's that the person is traveling in a car or a vehicle. They're going someplace. And then there's all kinds of the trip's going well, or it's not going well, or the tire falls off, or you fly off into the air and you lose the road, right? So the metaphor that emerges so often for folks is that death is a journey. Where am I going? How am I feeling about where I'm going? The actual process and the thought about how is my life going to change and end, that ultimate existential acknowledgement is felt in the body and then projected into a narrative form, into something that we can see and follow through time and share with others. Other things, other images come through that I suspect are ancestral or epigenetic, perhaps, that don't have to do with our individual lives, but come through from an evolutionary perspective, common threats that our ancestors dealt with, moved around, and survived. This is an interesting one. I don't know if y'all are into scary movies, but for me, perhaps the scariest movie of all was The Ring. In the movie The Ring, there's a scary little girl, and she's just the scariest little girl I've ever seen in my life. And her hair is in front of her face. You can't see her face. And she just stands there in front of a well in sort of a old-fashioned nightshirt and glowers at the viewer. We see the same image, but doubled in The Shining. You remember the image of The Shining of the twins that stand in the hallway as the elevator doors open. What is so terrifying about this image? What is so terrifying, especially about twins in this particular image? And so one possibility, one perspective, and this is something that my partner, my spouse, Wendy, has talked and thought about a lot in her studies of pathology and pathological disease, is thinking about plagues. And in times of plague throughout history, often everyone in a village, in a small village, would perish, except for one child who was immune for whatever reason. And they'd go wandering to find help. And every so often, it would be twins because they share the same genetic anomaly that allowed them to escape whatever that plague was. And so it was not uncommon, and it was a cultural meme in medieval Europe and other times, that if you were in a village and two small children are walking up into the village, everyone would run and hide because these children were carrying the plague. These children who look so defenseless and are hungry and looking for help are a symbol of death. They are literally death. So could it be that an image like this becomes archetypal, becomes epigenetically passed down to us through the body metaphor because our ancestors didn't answer that particular call? I don't know. I bring this as an example just to say that these nightmare images are not random. They emerge from somewhere. And hiding in, this term, this dream bizarreness that comes out of nightmare imagery is the underworld. It is the metaphors of the undead, as well as metaphors of animal and human hybrids, right? What is a monster? A monster is a slightly human-like creature, a terrifying creature that can communicate with us. They're stereotypes. The werewolf, the werecat. And these are seen, and there's myths about them all over the world. And they emerge at night. They emerge through nightmares. They emerge through sleep paralysis encounters. So there's an experiential visual aspect of what haunts us that has similarities all over the world, and yet also cultural variability and individual peculiarity. This is the world under. This is the underworld. This is the realm of shamanism. When I think back to this evolutionary thinking of how is the nightmare useful too, Patrick McNamara has a theory. He is a cognitive neuroscientist out of Boston. He has a wonderful book as well called Nightmares that discusses this theory, that he ties nightmares to a sociological theory called costly signal theory, which is the idea that we can have an authentic moment or expression or something that occurs to us that we signal to other people in our community, and it's too expensive to fake, which is to say that only if it's authentic will people believe it, and if not, folks lose their status. People stop trusting them. So if you think about this evolutionary capacity of, say, the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, most of the time that we've lived as humans has been a time in villages of, say, 100 to 200 people. This is how most of humanity has lived for most of the times that we've been genetically human. If you take sort of the stats of how many big dreamers or nightmare sufferers you're going to have in a village of about 200 people, it's basically between 5 and 10 folks are going to be your powerful dreamers. So every village has a number of dreamers, and they are sharing compelling visions. They could be precognitory. They could explain something or predict something. And if there is truth to it, if they're authentic, if the imagery that comes through is authentic to the adults, those children are recognized, they become healers. They become shamanic in a sense. And so that's, again, nightmares are related to a bunch of things, including creativity, including neurodivergence, as well as mental illness. They're all sort of like, it's an edgy zone. There's one example that was brought to my attention by an anthropologist named Ariana Sassoni, who worked with mestizo villagers in Peru. And she found that this was a time not long after the Maoists had cut through and essentially committed genocide against many farmers, many indigenous people. This is the Shining Path in the late 90s. Ariana interviewed many villagers who said that the way that they survived was by listening to the dreamers in their community. The dreamers would tell them when it was time to hide, when it was time to move village, and folks listened. Other stories she collected were that dreamers were able to locate the mass graves that had been dug, and they were able to find missing relatives thanks to the dreams that came through. And so I think about this, sort of the deeper side of this evolutionary capability about, like, is this my dream? Is this our dream? And what happens when we do listen to our nightmares and our bad dreams? We don't just blow them off. We make space for them. What is being told? What are we to learn? And so I want to start with that, to move into these spaces, thinking about the collective as well as the individual, thinking about the archetypal and the mythopoetic as well as the traumatic and the existential. It's a rich topic, and when we face it, we really are given gifts. Any reflections? I'll pause for some reflections or thoughts, and then I have an activity I'd like to do before we go.
I kind of like the idea for me that it's bigger than just my dream. It's bigger, and I think it's for me to discover, how big and the whys and the wheres. But I like that it's our and not my when it comes to dreaming. It's really cool.
It opens it up, doesn't it? I want to break the spell a little bit because I've been talking a long time, and I wanted to just do an activity together with y'all. And it's basically show and tell. And so here's my invitation to you is, let's take a minute, and I invite you to go find an object. Could be your most coveted small portable object, or perhaps the oldest small coveted object around, but bring back some kind of curious object that you love, that you want to show to us. And we'll share about why it has special meaning for us. That's the assignment. We'll take a minute to go find your object. This is show and tell. When you come back, do not show it off. We're gonna hold it, and then we'll present. Okay. Let's just take a minute. Don't overthink it. Don't go through the archives. I'll see you in a minute. Okay. My invitation is to, one by one, we can share our object and tell me why it's holds special meaning for you. And if anybody has any questions or clarifying questions, please feel free to ask. But we'll move pretty quickly through these. It's a small space. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. These are called pearl burls, and they grow in cedar trees. And you pull them out. They're like a little tooth. I have a few of them here, and they're just so strange. But they're my favorite activity, which is being in nature and treasure hunting at the same time. And so I just love going out in the woods and looking for them. They're just like little pieces of magic, little treasures. It doesn't harm the tree to pull them out. This is one that I peeled the bark off of. It's like a little virus that the tree gets, and then it grows like wood around it. So
Cool. Any particular kind of tree that you like the most?
Cedar. I think cedar has they grow in cedar trees maybe other trees too, but that's where I look. Usually
Nice.
Southern Oregon is where I go look for them when I'm down there.
Cool. Thanks, Azalea.
I'll go next.
Hey, Berta.
Here's my pendulum, and I use it periodically, when I really want an answer and I feel like I'm not quite getting the answer, or so I use my pendulum, and I'm good at getting it to spin really pretty rapidly. So I know that it's really answering some of my questions, and it feels like it gives me a great source to energy. Yeah.
Oh, so it's like a divination tool. You use it as a divination
Yes.
tool.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll go next. It was a difficult challenge. I was close to overthinking it. And I chose an amulet. I have several of these now. This is one that came as part of a gift package from a previous course. And it has, I didn't realize at the time, but it has a lot of Celtic imagery. And I happen to have Irish ancestry. And so I thought that was really cool. And I rarely use it for actual incubation or protection. I have an older one I use for that. And I got a necklace too that I really love. Oh, I don't have the fridge magnet. But it's like, I really liked it. This one was kind of special because of the Irish ancestry for me.
Thanks, Brian.
I wasn't sure. I just without thinking, this hangs really close to my bed. It's like it's a little locket. That's the word. I couldn't think of it at first. It's like it's just hanging on my nightstand, and I found it in my mom's things after she passed, and she was in a home at the very end, and this was there, and I had never seen this before. So it was something that was important to her because she took it there with her. I mean, she came from a big home, and this is one of the things she took with her. I never saw her wear it, but inside of it, it has a picture of her when she's younger and a picture of her sister when she's younger. And they're just really little tiny pictures. You can't really see. And then my grandma and my grandpa. So it's just her little family. And it's just very special to me because I feel like I have them all right here and I just have it by my bed. I'd never seen it before all these years.
So I have this. It's a really ugly clay thing that I made in grade 9. So it's like it's like the one thing that I have that's like, it's 36 years old, but it's a little jewelry thing. But it was like my one thing that I made because I always had these. I was always insecure about not being able to draw or like really make things like the other kids in the class. And so, but it works and it's functional. And so that has come with me everywhere. So it's like one of the things that I actually have. I don't have many things from childhood, but that's one thing that I keep. Mm-hmm. I made it. Yeah.
Okay, so I have this shell, and I got this about 25 years ago on Kauai on Secret Beach, and I felt very called to be on Kauai, and I feel very connected to the ocean. And I was really the only one camping on this beach. It was pretty much empty, and the ocean was really calm. And one day, like a little, just the tiniest blip of a wave came up and just spat this out right at my feet. And so I feel like it was a gift, especially for me, from the ocean. So very special.
Thank you.
I had to find my mouse first. Yep. There he is. Puff the Magic Dragon. And I'm a firm believer in dragons and unicorns and all that they can bring. And dragons by themselves are wonderful things. They're not scary things. They're not something to be feared, but they're something to be loved. And it's also left over from Vietnam, the Puff Magic Dragon. It's a protection thing.
Thank you.
I guess that leaves me. And what I have is, I don't know how well you can see this. I'm trying to get the camera to focus on it. And it is, oops, there it goes. It is a piece of driftwood found sculpture, back together here, that my father sometime found. I don't know whether it was up in Lake Superior or when they were out west in California or the state of Washington or something. But I can't really get away from it. So you can see there. And he called this, he had something of a sense of humor, and he called this Loch Ness progeny. And you can see the Nessie's head here and her body kind of swimming away. And he, later after he retired, this was, I think, shortly after he retired, he started doing some carvings and of penguins, and they are somewhat abstracted penguins, but they do in fact suggest and evoke an human emotional posture quite effectively. And then he went to the St. Anthony Park Art Fair each summer, put them on a table and sold them, but it was mostly a chance to talk to neighbors and friends and have a good social time. Anyway, this is quite characteristic of one aspect of my father's personality. He's been gone for 25 years.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. Well, mine is my Naugahyde friend, Owlie. I've had Owlie since I was probably 3 or 4. And so, believe it or not, he's quite comforting for me. I think it was maybe when I was a young adult where I realized, oh, he's actually kind of terrifying. He's not comforting at all. People did not have the same experience that I had when seeing Owlie. But this, the story behind Owlie is that this is made of Naugahyde, like as I said. So this is when after Naugahyde, which is synthetic leather that came out, late 60s, early 70s, something like that. And there was this huge well, they tried to make everything with Naugahyde for a while, right? And so at the time, my grandfather worked for a department store, and these were handed out to show the beauty and durability of Naugahyde if you wanted to buy a Naugahyde couch. And this was part of one of their, the original Ugly Doll, basically. And so You can see these on eBay. They came in all kinds of sizes and varieties, but this one is owly. So yeah, that's mine. Thank you for sharing. You know, and did you notice when we were sharing these and folks were listening? Did you notice yourself leaning towards the screen, perhaps to get a better look, or because you wanted to see a particular detail? What that is the physical embodiment of curiosity, right? And curiosity is the first tonic for nightmares. When we become curious about something that we're experiencing and that's in front of us, when we lean towards it, fear dissolves. Right? We're leaning, into the world and not away from it. This is one of the first truths of facing these experiences, is learning how to be curious about what emerges. To sit in, as I often say, to sit in the unknown or the unknowing, in the mystery, but not to give up on it, to be okay with and to be able to handle that unknowing. I think back to the first dream that I shared, the dream of the forgotten baby. It was curiosity that turned the tide for me. It was curiosity that allowed me to lift that sheet. It was curiosity that allowed me to touch the child and when it came back to life. And so there's an aspect of curiosity that's mindfulness, right? There's a separation of experience that's occurring. There's a lightness of experience, of witnessing what's going to happen next. What is this about? What is emerging here? And holding back my own projections and my fears and my assumptions, and just holding back that tide to let curiosity and new information to emerge. So that's the first balm. It's the first essential skill for working with nightmares, and it's deeply cognitive, I would say. Doesn't mean that it can't be playful, but it comes out of a cognitive space as a practice. It's what I call an upper world cognitive posture, in that it is active. It is much about the mind as opposed to emotionality. It lifts us out of entrenched feelings into new possibilities. And so curiosity around this topic is what is going to lead us into success and give us the chance to see things in a new way as we move forward with bad dreams for the next month. But before we do that, we have to be resourced. And this is something that you see from PTSD counselors to clinical work, is that we need to make sure that we are resourced and have a plan for what am I going to do when I'm not feeling unsafe. And so I've spoken about this before in Foundations of Dreaming, about setting up your dream sanctuary. And so I made a check sheet to kind of formalize, like, here's some things that we can do to inventory our bedroom or where we sleep or nap, for things that can help this place become a better container. So we are well resourced in the moment for going to sleep feeling protected, feeling safe, feeling nurtured. When we wake up at night, being able to have these feelings, right? Feeling safe, feeling nurtured. Including the liminality, including sacred objects, including being able to notice and experience protection in an ethereal way when we are in between worlds. And so not just, does this door lock to my bedroom, but, is the dream catcher active? is my talisman, you know, placed where I want it to be, where I need it to be, right? The other aspect of resourcing that's important when delving into work like this is doing a look into who are my allies, who can I call upon when I'm feeling vulnerable. And these can be real people that you can call on the phone and loved ones, as well as, you know, the larger than life figures in our life, or perhaps folks of spiritual standing in your life or your tradition. Who do you pray to? Who holds space for you? And it could be not even humans, right? We're talking about non-human people as well, right? Let's expand the circle there. And lastly, am I resourced in the sense that when I begin getting triggered by a nightmare, that I have some things I can do to ground myself, or take a look at what's going on with what I know are stress or anxiety triggers in my life. So, you know, and these are, we've gone through before in terms of dreaming foundations, but really things like alcohol and making sure we're getting enough sleep, as well as, you know, all the little sleep stealers that affect our life, and noticing, you know, is there a way that I can take better care of myself while this is emerging? Can I, you know, take a little more care right now? Can I be a little more self-compassionate and caring with myself and my body during this time? This is part of being well-resourced as well. And so, and lastly, is just making the space to record these dreams, which is sometimes easier said than done, right? But the bad dreams, the scary dreams, the nightmare, the one you don't want to write down is precisely the one that needs expression the most. And there's a process that happens that unfurls when we do this that's automatic. The work, the tenderizing of the experience begins to happen automatically, unconsciously, as we put it into words, or we share it with someone, or we make an image from it. So that's the homework, really, for the night, is to get curious about your bad dreams. And if you keep a dream journal, I invite you over the period of the next month, but specifically starting this week, to take a look at your past bad dreams and just see if you can start noticing any patterns. You know, are there repetitive themes? What is the dreamer's actions in these dreams? You're noticing patterns of the dreamer's action. Like, am I always running away? Or what am I always running away from, right? You can also notice patterns such as emotionality. Like, is the dreamer's emotional reaction, is it becoming better or sort of more adaptive, or worse over time? Like, what's the larger scope of the dreamer's relationship to bad dreams? Because, right, it's going to kind of go like this. It's not just, we're not just ascending Jacob's ladder here. We're revolving like a moth around a flame, in a sense. That is my recommendation for the week as we move into this process, is to get curious and resource yourself with self-compassion and some of these practices. And to that end, I put just a couple of resources in the Bad Dreams course room that help with that. One is the checklist on the sanctuary that you can print. You can literally put it on a clipboard and take it into your dream and into your bedroom and just be like, okay, just inventory these aspects. As well as there's an article that I wrote a while back about tips for reducing nightmares. And so these are ways of looking at those sleep stealers, maybe some of them that you haven't thought about before that can make a difference, that can be emergent. So with that, I can open back up to some question and answers, and then we can go on our way.
Ryan, I'm curious. I was just with my grandkids. We're all with our families over the holidays, and my 9-year-old grandson is playing Fortnite and killing all these people, and having so much fun killing all these people. And I'm wondering what does that do to his dreams, and what does that do to his psychic, and what's your opinion on that? I can't imagine it doesn't go into his dreams and he doesn't think, oh, I can go kill, these other people in the dreams. And, you hear about people that have dreams and have nightmares, and they do go out and shoot and kill people. Is there a correlation that they've done with research with that?
So that's fascinating. Jane Gackenbach is probably the researcher whose work I know the most about this topic, and she's been working on dreams of gamers for probably 15 years. And she, with her students, have basically determined by now that there's no correlation between gaming and an overall worsening of psychological health, even for these shooting dreams. But there are changes that happen in the dreamscape. And in fact, gamers do tend to have different kinds of dreams than the general public. And so there are some distinctions. And one of them is that gamers tend, as a whole, to be more lucid. And probably because they are used to being, having that metacognition, controlling an avatar in a realistic space, being able to navigate it. They're games of vigilance. All these games take a considerable amount of vigilance, and vigilance is something that spills over as a cognitive habit into lucid dreaming. So there's not a one-to-one about that, but the larger philosophical question for me is like, what am I training my brain for? Like, like if I spend my time on Fortnite, do I want to sculpt my inner world to be like this? And of course, the dark side, right, of the military-industrial complex is that we know, and it's not like it's a conspiracy, but the U.S. Army works with game manufacturers to create combat-rich scenarios that translate well to doing intelligence work and field work in real life. And so down to the extent of how the controllers of a game and the controllers of a armed drone are similar. And so that's another aspect of it that definitely, for me, from a cultural perspective, raises questions about what am I training my brain for. This was a very good start to what I hope is going to be a powerful month ahead of us. And I look forward to seeing you in the portal. I'll be getting the recording up. So thanks. Download that Dream Sanctuary checklist, and I'll see you around. Good night.
Night.